The man sighed deeply, his eyes softening. "What's your name?" "Jamal," he replied. "Well, Jamal, you can't stay here. This place is not safe," the man said firmly. "Come with me. You look like you could use a proper meal and some rest." Jamal hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But the hunger gnawing at his stomach and the ache in his bones convinced him to follow the man. And so, his new life began. The man, whose name was Ibrahim, took Jamal to his modest home, a small two-room apartment in the heart of the bustling town. The smell of freshly cooked beans and fried plantains filled the air as they stepped inside. For the first time in days, Jamal felt a sliver of comfort. Ibrahim handed him a plate of food and watched as Jamal devoured it. "You can stay here," Ibrahim said after a while. "But you'll have to work. I run a bus, and I need a conductor. Can you do that?" Jamal nodded eagerly. "I'll do anything, sir." "Thank you." The next day, Jamal began his new life as a bus conductor. The job was tough and chaotic. From sunrise to sunset, he shouted out routes, collected fares, and dealt with rude passengers. His voice grew hoarse from constant yelling, and his feet ached from jumping in and out of the moving bus. But Jamal didn't complain. He was grateful to Ibrahim for giving him a roof over his head and a sense of purpose. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Jamal quickly adapted to the hustle and bustle of his new life. He buried every memory of his mother deep within him, convincing himself that she was just a part of his past, a past he wanted to forget. Years later, time passed swiftly, and Jamal grew from a skinny, scared boy into a hardened young man. The once timid conductor now ruled the bus parks with a booming voice and a commanding presence. Ibrahim noticed Jamal's dedication and hard work. One day, as they sat together after a long day, Ibrahim said, "Jamal, you've been with me for years now. You've proven yourself to be reliable. I think it's time you owned your own bus." Jamal's eyes widened. "Really, Baba?" he asked, excitement lighting up his face. Ibrahim nodded. "Yes. I've been saving up for you. You deserve it." A few weeks later, Jamal bought his first bus with Ibrahim's help. The sense of pride he felt that day was unmatched. He painted the bus in bright colors and gave it a name, God Bless Me. Jamal was no longer a mere conductor. He was now a driver, a boss in his own right. With his newfound status, Jamal began to enjoy the perks of being a bus owner. He made good money and spent it lavishly. He rented a bigger apartment, bought expensive clothes, and surrounded himself with friends who praised his success. But as Jamal climbed the social ladder, he became more arrogant. He looked down on others, forgetting the kindness that Ibrahim had shown him when he was just a helpless boy in an unfinished building. "Jamal, remember where you came from," Ibrahim would often warn him. "Pride goes before a fall." But Jamal would laugh it off. "Baba, I've worked hard for this. Let me enjoy my life," he'd say dismissively. One night, after a long day of driving, Jamal returned to his apartment. As he lay on his comfortable bed, exhaustion overtaking him, he heard a faint sound. "Jamal?" The voice was soft, echoing through the room. Jamal sat up, his heart racing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaky. There was no response. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Jamal shook his head, convincing himself it was just his imagination. But the next night, it happened again. "Jamal?" This time, the voice was louder and more distinct. It sent shivers down his spine. He jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights, searching every corner of the apartment. But he found nothing. The voice began to haunt him every night, growing louder and more insistent. "Jamal, remember your mother." Jamal's sleep became restless, his mind plagued by nightmares. He saw visions of his mother crawling on the floor, her tear-streaked face begging for his forgiveness. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, the voice returned, but this time it was accompanied by a shadowy figure. The figure was faint, but Jamal could make out the outline of a woman. His mother. "Jamal, why have you forgotten me?" the figure whispered. Jamal screamed, covering his ears. "Leave me alone. You're not real." For months, the haunting memories of his mother refused to leave him. Every night, her voice echoed in his ears. Every dream was filled with her presence. It was as if she was calling him, begging him to come back and make things right. Ibrahim noticed the change in Jamal. The once confident and proud young man had become restless and withdrawn. One night, after dinner, Ibrahim sat Jamal down. "Jamal, something is eating you up," he said. "You've been acting strange. Tell me the truth, what is it?" Jamal hesitated. He had hidden his past from Ibrahim for years, pretending to be an orphan with no family. But now, the weight of his guilt was too heavy to bear. He decided it was time to confess. "Uncle Ibrahim," he began, his voice trembling. "I lied to you. I'm not an orphan. I have a mother." Ibrahim's expression hardened, but he said nothing, letting Jamal continue. "I ran away from home years ago. My mother, she was crippled. I hated her for it. I was cruel to her. And when I left, I never looked back. I haven't seen her since." Tears streamed down Jamal's face. Ibrahim was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Then he exploded. "You mean to tell me that all this time, you've been living in comfort, calling yourself an orphan, while your mother, crippled and helpless, was left to suffer alone?" Ibrahim's voice was filled with fury. Jamal hung his head in shame. "I was ashamed," he whispered. "You don't know what shame is." Ibrahim thundered. "You abandoned the woman who gave you life. Do you know what it means to be a mother? Do you know the sacrifices she must have made for you?" Jamal's tears fell faster. "Listen to me, Jamal," Ibrahim said, his voice shaking with anger. "You will take me to your village. I want to see this mother of yours. If you refuse, I will make sure you lose everything you've worked for. Do you hear me?" Jamal nodded meekly. "I'll take you," he whispered. The next morning, Jamal and Ibrahim set off for the village. The journey was long and silent. Jamal's heart pounded with every mile, dread creeping into his chest. When they arrived, Jamal barely recognized the village. The once familiar paths were overgrown with weeds. The houses seemed smaller than he remembered. As they walked through the dusty streets, villagers stared at Jamal with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Is that not Jamal?" someone whispered. "Yes, the one who abandoned his crippled mother," another replied. Jamal's shame deepened with every step. He led Ibrahim to the spot where his mother's house used to stand. But when they got there, all they saw was rubble. Ibrahim frowned. "What happened here?" A woman passing by stopped and shook her head. "You're looking for Fatima, aren't you?" she asked, her voice tinged with pity. Jamal nodded slowly. "Yes, where is she?" The woman sighed. "Her house collapsed during the rainy season. She was inside when it happened. She didn't survive." Jamal's legs gave way. No, it can't be," he whispered. Jamal collapsed to his knees, his fingers clawing at the dirt as his whole body trembled. No, it can't be," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She waited for me." The woman sighed deeply. "She did," she said softly. "She always said, Jamal will come back. He'll find me one day. But you never did." Jamal let out a heart-wrenching cry, his chest heaving with pain. The villagers stood around him, watching in silence. Some shook their heads in pity, while others whispered among themselves. "See what disobedience and wickedness have caused," one man murmured. "God doesn't sleep," another added. Ibrahim remained still, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't comfort Jamal. He didn't think he deserved it. Where is she buried?" Jamal finally asked, his voice hoarse. The woman pointed toward a small burial ground at the edge of the village. "Follow me." Jamal forced himself to stand, his legs weak beneath him. Every step toward the grave felt heavier than the last. When they reached the small cemetery, the woman stopped in front of a simple mound of earth with a wooden cross at the head. "This is where she rests," she said. "We buried her here a few months ago." Jamal fell to his knees before the grave. His fingers trembled as he traced the wooden cross. "Mama," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "I was a terrible son. I was blind to your love, your sacrifices. I should have been here. I should have taken care of you, he sobbed. But the only response was the rustling of the wind through the trees. His mother was gone, and he could never make it right. Jamal stayed at his mother's grave for hours, pouring out his heart, begging for forgiveness from a woman who could no longer hear him. Ibrahim watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. When Jamal finally stood up, his eyes red and swollen, Ibrahim walked over. "You can cry all you want, Jamal," he said coldly. "But crying won't bring her back." Jamal lowered his head in shame. "The only thing you can do now," Ibrahim continued, "is honor her memory. Change your ways. Let her sacrifice for you not be in vain." Jamal nodded weakly. "I will, Uncle Ibrahim. I swear, I will." Jamal stayed in the village for few more days. He helped the villagers clear the rubble of his mother's collapsed home. He gave them money to rebuild it, not for himself, but as a place for travelers and the needy to find shelter. He also donated to the community, hoping to make amends for his years of neglect. The villagers watched him work, some still resentful, others pitying him. "He has learned his lesson," one old woman murmured. "But it's too late," another added. When Jamal finally left the village, he carried a heavy heart with him. Back in the city, he sold his bus. With the money, he started a charity for mothers in need, naming it after his own mother, Fatima's Haven. Every day, he prayed for her soul, hoping that somewhere, somehow, she could see the man he was trying to become. But no matter what he did, the pain of losing her would never leave him. It was a scar he would carry for the rest of his life. A reminder of the price of pride, and the cost of neglecting those who love us the most. The end. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more cookies.